Hello, everyone. Happy New Year, and welcome to another episode of the Vanishing Hour. I hope everyone had a safe and lovely holiday season. I know I've been sort of MIA with the episode since early November. Well, it turns out we moved. It was an excruciatingly long process considering it was only 5 miles from where we were currently at. But there were a lot of are we, aren't we moments throughout the whole process, and I'm an early packer, so I had all of our stuff immediately packed, and then about a week later, we were not sure if we were actually going through, but by that point, I had packed. I wasn't unpacking until I knew for sure, so when it ended up turning into this whole dilemma. Eventually, by the beginning of December, we knew for certain we were moving. We got to our new place, and I've sort of been scrambling to find all the things because they have been packed for so long, and I couldn't remember what boxes I had put anything in. And my memory has decided to go down with the captain at this point. It's a sinking ship situation over here. Then the holidays hit us, and we've been tied up with that until recently. Speaking of sinking ships, though, I caught up on a lot of Netflix shows. I got super into 1899 only to realize it tanked by Netflix standards and was canceled, so now I don't know what to do with my life. I love moody mystery mindfuck dramas, especially if they're set on ships, because I find ships to be the creepiest thing in existence, so I was bummed about that. I, of course, watched Wednesday along with everyone else and their grandmothers. Loved her dance until it became this regurgitated vomit all over social media, and now I just want it to stop. What else did I do? Ooh, season 2 of Alice in Borderlands dropped, and I blew through that in probably 0.3 seconds. If you haven't watched it yet, do yourself a favor. I don't like comparing it to Squid Games, and I know a lot of the fan base doesn't like that either, because they are obviously completely different stories from different sources and origins. But if the premise of these dangerous, life-threatening games with a heartfelt story at the core that you attach to, all while remaining clenched the entire time is your thing, you need to check it out. It came out, I think, before Squid Games, and is Japanese-based, not Korean, if I'm not mistaken, but it satisfies a similar itch. Check it out. Again, Alice in Borderlands. Honestly, I'm really considering making a sister podcast where we just talk about movies and TV shows and games, because I can talk about this stuff forever. It may be something in the future if I can find the time. But anyway, let's get into the case we're going to talk about today. This case has me baffled. There's really no other term to describe this one. It's odd because there are clear markers within the events that take place that tell you something went horribly wrong, but there's been nothing found to really establish what that was. I'll explain more when we reach those specific events in the timeline. But the biggest issue is that, like with many cases we have discussed in the past, there were many balls dropped at the beginning of the case. But the reasoning behind why is mind-boggling. There's just so much to unwrap here. I have a lot I want to cover and discuss and analyze and talk ourselves through. This case also shares a lot of similarities with many other cases I'm sure we've all heard about across the nation, male and female. One that immediately came to mind was our very first case we covered here, the Bryce Laspisa case. I want to treat this case with as much respect as possible, with hopefully providing some alternative thoughts and potential suggestions sort of woven in as well. Get ready, guys. Today's case is the vanishing of Jason Landry. Jason Landry was born and raised in Missouri City, Texas on July 29, 1999 to parents Kent and Lisa Landry. Missouri City is located just a pinch southwest of Houston, of which is obviously on the eastern side of the state. Kent has been the sort of mouthpiece for the Landry family and a real advocate for his son since his disappearance. It's clear, just by his actions and the actions of their family from day one, that Jason came from a very loving and supporting family and home. Jason was the youngest of 3 siblings with an older sister and an older brother as well. At one point, Kent was a lawyer, but he became a pastor at the church the family attended regularly. The whole family became really involved with the church as well. Jason and his siblings were raised in the Christian faith. Many family photos and stories shared online show that Jason was proud of his religion and identified a lot with his beliefs and was sort of defined by them. He attended church camp as a teenager and became a prominent figure there for many summers as well. His family explained that he cherished the camp and took advantage of every opportunity he could to be a part of the camp outreach in the years to follow. I remember attending church camp one year. I didn't consider myself a social butterfly like Jason, so I struggled a little out there to say the least. But it was a great experience for many others, and there was a lot of fun to be had. There was a lot of physical, like group activities and competitive play and sports, and that was literally the opposite of me at the time. I was the emo, antisocial, awkward girl that hid in the back in hopes of not getting picked for stuff. I even remember the year that I went, one of my mom's friends went as a chaperone, and I ended up pretty much hanging out with her most of the time. I think she even got sick of me, though, at some point. She made us go canoeing together out on the lake, and me being terrified of water, I was crying the whole time. We eventually ended up capsizing, which obviously helped the situation tons. Good times. Hume Lake, thank you. But anyway, Jason was described by his family and friends as just a kind of goofy, energetic soul. They shared many home video clips and photos of family vacations together, everyone genuinely beaming at the camera. They also shared clips that friends had of Jason as well. Like I mentioned, he was just a goofball at heart, a relatable goofball at heart. A little tidbit about myself, like most people, I am a fan of Disney. I wouldn't categorize myself as a diehard like many people do, but I've had my share of Disney visits. I grew up with the classics, and now I got kids that are fans as well. But one song I will say I'm a fanatic for is the Mulan song, I'll Make a Man Out of You. I literally sing it constantly. It's on my everyday playlist, different covers of it as well. I belt it out with my kids in the car. It's just one of those undeniable classics. Funnily enough, there's one clip of Jason in his car literally belting the same song while riding passenger with a friend recording him. I don't think I've ever stumbled across a more relatable clip than that one while researching a case. It just warmed my heart. You couldn't help but sing along and crack up with him. And I'm glad whoever caught that moment on camera was able to share it, because it gives you such an insight into the type of person he is, and it's just awesome. More clips were obviously shared of Jason. One was him showing up at a cupcake shop and hauling off with an amount of cupcakes that could feed a nation for a year. It was sweet to see. Another commonality between him and I was a love of horror movies. There was a snap that showed Jason and a female friend leaving a movie theater and walking out to the parking lot sharing their response to the horror movie The Nun, which I think is the beginning chronologically of the Conjuring franchise timeline. Anyway, I remember the trailer for that movie of that possessed ass nun on the street who like dead eyes the camera as it pans by. It was terrifying. Well, that was a breeze for him apparently. I think he reviews it to the camera in a way very jokingly as a romantic comedy or something of that nature, as his gal pal is just curled into a fetal position, obviously shook by the whole movie itself. It's just a fun clip. He seemed to have just a really welcoming, chill vibe about him that you just gravitated towards and wanted to be his friend. I really enjoyed getting to know just a small portion of him through those memories of his loved ones. Aside from his goofy side, though, Jason also had dreams and aspirations and was a motivated individual. He graduated high school and was accepted at Texas State University, where he began his pursuit in knowledge and hoped to eventually end up in their sound recording technology program. I have no idea what that entails, but it sounds fascinating. By the end of 2020, Jason was finishing up his first semester at Texas State. As we all know, though, 2020 was a weird-ass year for the world. COVID hit. Clearly, no one was prepared for a pandemic. People thought toilet paper in excessive amounts was going to protect them somehow. It was just utter chaos. Even now in 2023, we are all still adjusting to its after effects. But Jason was attending college at a time when in-person anything was just not allowed. The majority of his time was spent in his apartment online doing his schoolwork. This really wore a lot on him because he, by nature, was an extrovert. And I think, in general, it really wore down a lot of people. I remember the struggle was very real. My kids, myself, Shadow, who was working from home, it was just a really weird time. And I think anyone would be lying if they said that going through those events did not change them in some way. I know it changed me. And I think the same could be said for Jason as well. Now, I don't care about anyone's personal stance on the use of marijuana. I am not in any place to throw judgment. I myself have smoked in the past, not now. Mom, if you're listening, I'm sorry. But I did for a couple years, and I don't look at it as a negative experience in any way. I believe everyone is entitled to their own opinions on the subject. However, I do not think that we are entitled to judge anyone for those opinions or those decisions. I say this because, as we will eventually come to find, Jason's use of marijuana seemed to be a point of judgment early on in this case, and moving forward, I want to squash that type of mentality here, because we're not going to do that, and we do not support that here either. So I just wanted to throw that little disclaimer out there before we head any further. So up until this point, Jason is a 21-year-old young man who's attending college during a very stressful pandemic for the world. Which brings us to December of 2020. Jason's approaching his winter break from school. He has plans to make the roughly 2 to 3 hour drive from San Marcos, where school is, to his hometown, which is Missouri City. He usually spends holidays there, and while he's made the drive 3 times already this school year, this time he plans to drive it at night instead of daytime. My assumption is to maybe avoid traffic, being that the majority of this drive is highway driving, and to me that makes sense. Monday, December 7th, 2020. Childhood friend and now college neighbor Jack states that he sees Jason this day, along with pretty much every day for the rest of the week. What's important about this day, though, is that he says this day started out like any other day. Jason was his usual self. Nothing stood out of the ordinary to him. However, it's every other day for the rest of the week that something seems slightly off. He states that Jason was not eating or sleeping normally for the week and was definitely smoking more than he usually would. Aside from that, though, Jason doesn't seem to be suffering from anything else. He's coherent, he's making sense, he's engaging with his friends, he's not expressing any other odd or worrisome behavior. According to police evidence, though, they claim that a review of Jason's internet search history after he goes missing for this particular week revealed some questionable searches. They released an image of a particular marijuana website called allbud.com that he visited on December 8th at exactly 11:52 p.m. And then a particular strain of marijuana on the same website a handful of hours later on December 9th at 6:52 a.m. I don't think this is significant other than to maybe corroborate the fact that he was probably not sleeping well given the timestamps. I personally was not able to locate any images or any other information regarding the alleged searches that they found that seemed to be a little bit more suspicious to authorities. They are claiming they also allegedly found Google searches, quote unquote, how long can you live in the woods without food? And how long can you go in the wilderness? Now, these were the only quoted statements, but they go on to claim he searched up topics of spiritual enlightenment practices, psychedelic drugs, and how they play a role in that type of thing. He Googled different strains of marijuana and how to combine them. Just a lot of things in that realm. They claim there's communications with individuals where Jason talks about his intent on reaching spiritual enlightenment through narcotics. Again, There was no further elaboration on this. They did not release any screenshots of the Google searches. So I'm taking that at least with a grain of salt. Saturday, December 12th, 2020. At about 9:30 in the morning, Jason and his mother, Lisa, share a very normal text exchange. Being that Christmas is only a few weeks away, Mom wants to know what Jason wants for Christmas. He texts her over his list of wants. And this is a list any parent would envy. It has so many detailed options and is well thought out too, with different price ranges too, depending on what, you're planning or wanting to spend. His lists include many typical young adult guy things, such as some snazzy new Nike Air Jordan 1s, the Into the Spider-Verse edition, because if I haven't stated already, he's a very big Spider-Man fan, or Marvel fan in general, among a few other shoe options too, in case they're sold out. He lists an Overwatch pack, which for those of you who don't know is a super popular online team-based 5v5 battle game made by developer Blizzard. Jason also is a fan of Rocket League, which is a super popular game to play as well. He has clothing, more Marvel gear. I'm just stumbling all over my words today. He has new headphones, and of course, his ultimate accessory, crazy socks. Jason was known for his delectable taste in unconventional and zany socks. It was just his thing, and he was always looking to expand his collection. I thought that was such a unique thing about someone, and I liked it, so I threw it in here. Anyway, he shoots his list over to his mother. Their conversation regarding the list continues back and forth throughout the day as well as into the early evening. What irks me, though, is at this point, there is no other definitive timeline given of his actions until 10:55 p.m. What we do know is that at some point during most likely the evening or night on the 13th, Jason had 2 video interaction calls, I guess, with at least one unknown friend. My assumption is the same person because the person just happened to record these calls. These FaceTime calls were screen recorded by the friend at the time, who states that Jason was pretty out of it and they wanted to record the interactions to show him at a later point because they felt Jason wouldn't remember them. There is no sound, but this unknown friend claims Jason was again talking about this spiritual enlightening concept he had and appeared to be really high. In one clip, he's wearing a lighter teal colored shirt. He's sitting down in a room and he's fiddling with something. I couldn't really tell you definitively without any sound to the video. There were suggestions that he was rolling marijuana blunts. I can't confirm that because I've personally never done it and I don't know what tools you use. And he clearly appears to be using some sort of tool. To me, it looked like a harmonica, even though I know it wasn't a harmonica. But regardless, he's talking animatedly, he's in good spirits, he's engaged in not only the conversation, but also in whatever it is he's doing with the harmonica-looking thing. The other clip is of him walking around inside what appears to be the same house, maybe the same room. It's inside a house. Only now he's wearing a faded red t-shirt from the beloved church camp he spent so many summers at. He puts on a faded gray or maybe possibly a black baseball cap on his head backwards as he's talking and smiling at whoever he's FaceTiming with. There's no other context given, but it's important to note that with the second clip, the clothing he is seen wearing is ultimately the clothing we find at the scene of his disappearance. Most sources linked to this footage have stated that the footage is confirmed to be from that Saturday, just hours before the disappearance. Now, I know the source of the video states they recorded it because Jason was out of it, and he very well could be without knowing what's being said. But he looks fine to me. He's got good hand-eye coordination. He's alert. He's engaged. He's focused on whatever he's doing, but he's also talking well and making eye contact with whoever it is on the screen. His eyes aren't squinting. They're not bloodshot. He's not, rolling his eyes or, rubbing his face, looking, exhausted. My point is, I guess, that I found the reasoning for recording a seemingly common interaction with a friend for the reason that he was so out of it you thought he wouldn't remember wasn't completely believable. I guess when hearing that, I was expecting to see him, sloppy or incoherent or unfocused and, things like that. Not normal. Again, I don't know what he was saying since I can't hear anything. And no one else has made mention of this not adding up to them either. So it could be nothing. But it just rubbed me weird and it didn't line up. Even without sound, I feel like you would see visual cues of someone blitzed out of their mind, not a normal dude rolling blunts and talking. That's just me, though. This bothers me a little because, as we will come to find later on, it's not out of the realm of possibility that someone Jason knew is responsible for his whereabouts. Regardless, as I mentioned shortly ago, we have no public definitive timeline until exactly 10:55 p.m. He receives a text from Jack shortly before 11 p.m. that suggests he should get some sleep and leave, the next day. Jason replies, "I'm all good. I appreciate you looking out." According to investigators, at 10:55 p.m., Jason left his apartment with his backpack and toiletries, his gaming laptop and other gaming gear, and his betta fish in his tumbler. Yes, I know that sounds odd, but think about it. If you're leaving for winter break and are not coming back to college for several weeks, who's going to feed and care for your fish while you're gone? The poor dude will starve and be dead by the time you get back, so you gotta take him with you. And if you're only planning to drive a couple hours back to your hometown, I can see in a 21-year-old's mind a tumbler being a sufficient device to carry them in the car with you. If you're not some sort of fish-owning connoisseur who has fancy fish traveling equipment, which I'm not even sure exists. But anyway, he loads all of these items that speak to him intending to head to somebody's home, whether it's family or friends, with no other detours in mind. I say this because of that internet search allegation. If he was planning to take this opportunity to go on some spiritual enlightenment psychedelic journey, I don't think he would be packing up gaming equipment and his pet fish to take with him. We also wouldn't be entering directions to his hometown of Missouri City in our Waze app. We would be taking water, food, sleeping bag, flashlights, shit to keep you comfortable in the wilderness. Remember, this please, because it's vital logic we will be applying to this case later. So, it's 10:55 p.m., and we are following the directions on the Waze app that tell us his trip will be approximately 165 miles heading east, equaling to a rough 2.5 to 3 hour drive at this time of night. I double checked with Google Maps for this particular time of night on this particular evening just to make sure that there weren't any unexpected detours or road closures, but nothing was listed. The temperature was in the 30s, so it was brisk. It wasn't snowing, it wasn't raining, it was just very chilly. Jason's dressed in basketball shorts, a faded red t-shirt, his backwards cap, some crazy socks, and some slides. In no way was he dressed for anything other than a drive from point A to point B. He jumps on to Highway 80, headed in a southeasterly direction, passing under the Interstate 35 underpass in San Marcos. We know this because the Waze app was pinging his digital footprint every minute. Investigators claim they could see his every move for every minute at this time, and he was following the route to a T. Now, I also want to state that while police investigators have never stated that no one was in the car with Jason that night, I wasn't able to find any public evidence to state that there was proof that no one was in the car either. In my honest opinion, we, and by we, I mean I, can't rule out the possibility that Jason wasn't traveling alone. At 11:07 p.m., he is still on Highway 80, heading southeast. He crosses over the county line into Caldwell County. A short time later, at 11:11 p.m., he reaches Martindale, Texas, which is a city in Caldwell County that is roughly just shy of the halfway point between San Marcos and a town called Luling, Texas. 11:15 p.m., he passes over the 130, still traveling on Highway 80 as intended. At 11:24 p.m., Jason has reached the town of Luling, Texas. Highway 80 essentially dead ends here. It's no longer a highway and it becomes a city street called East Austin Street. Luling itself is a small town of less than about 6,000 people. It's definitely more on the rural side of things and is essentially in the middle of oil fields and wood processing businesses and a sprinkling of residential areas. Aside from the residential areas, there are also farms and oil fields. And like I mentioned, the wood processing businesses and retention ponds that kind of surround the borders of Luling itself. It's important to know a little about Luling because this is essentially where everything derails. Now, as I've mentioned, Highway 80 turns into East Austin Street here in Luling. If you stay on it for a mile or two and continue heading east as it travels, it intersects with Highway 183 that runs north to south and is known as Magnolia Street in this part of town. After this intersection, it will quickly turn into a residential street called Spruce Street before veering in a northeast direction and becoming the main drag / gravel road that cuts through Caldwell County rural area and farms and pretty much like acres of nothingness, known as Salt Flat Road. Salt Flat runs in a northeasterly direction away from Luling. Now, at this intersection of Highway 80, aka Austin Street, and Highway 183, aka Magnolia Street, everything shifts in Jason's behavior. We know from his digital footprint, or in other words, his cellular activity, that he minimizes the Waze app and opens Snapchat. One source stated it was to watch a story, but I couldn't find the confirmation of that anywhere. We don't know if it was because he received a message, a call, was just choosing to look at a story or browse Snapchat for whatever reason. But for anyone who's ever traveled for an extended period of time and is usually using a GPS app, we don't minimize mid-trip for Snapchat unless there's a reason to, right? Well, Jason does. Now, it's at this exact time, though, that several things occur. According to Jason's Waze app, he should have made a right onto Highway 183, aka Magnolia Street, and then about 4 blocks down made a left onto Pierce Street, which confusingly enough is also called Highway 183, but the difference being that this one runs east-west, not north-south. He would have needed to do this in order to continue on his path to Missouri City. Investigators do not believe he did this. They believe he continued on Austin Street as it changed into Spruce Street and ultimately headed northeast on it as it turned into Salt Flat Road and continued on from there. Now, I say believe because they have no way of confirming this like they did with the rest of his trip thus far, because Jason's digital footprint ends at the Magnolia-Austin intersection. This means that he essentially never touched his phone again. He didn't use any apps. He didn't send a text, make a call, receive a call or a text, do a Google search, nothing. We do know the phone did not die. We know that for a fact, and I will explain later why. But his digital footprint ends here at roughly 11:26 p.m. This is a problem. Now, many may be wondering, well, cell tower data can still track you, right? And the answer is yes. Yes, it can. But cell tower data, in short, works like this. Your phone, so long as it is on, will send a ping to the nearest tower every X amount of time. This is helpful if you are traveling within a path that covers multiple towers and creates a breadcrumb sort of trail. This is often seen in highly populated, large cities or in a longer distance of travel over time. We are not there. We are in a small town, not a large town, and we're in the middle of nowhere, Texas. No offense. I attempted to look up cell tower data to see how many are in this area approximately, but without knowing his carrier, it's a little harder. But an overview of the major carriers showed not a whole hell of a lot out here compared to more congested cities. To further complicate the situation, I'm so sorry I have jarbled mouth today because I've had about 5 cups of coffee in a very short amount of time. So please bear with me. But anyway, what complicates the situation more is from this intersection to where we ultimately know Jason's journey ends is a mere 5 miles. That could very well be just one tower within that area. Therefore, he's not pinging in any direction other than the same tower. Therefore, not providing a breadcrumb trail and simply showing him in the same area for the entire time. This really accentuates how much a digital footprint can alleviate that problem, but without one coming from Jason's phone, we are left wondering what happened. Now, this is where we introduce the local law enforcement's running theory of what happened from this point on. I will say right now, it's not the same as the PI. We will meet later, and it's not the same as my own theory. But we will start with it. And trust me, it gets a little fucking weird if you ask me. Police believe that the Snapchat switch at this intersection led Jason to miss the turn he needed and had him continuing on this road onto Salt Flat and continuing on for another approximately 5 miles. Coming from this direction, the road turns to gravel about 2 miles in. It's about this time as well that all the residential homes or sprinkling of businesses are pretty much gone. There's no street lights out there whatsoever. It's pitch black. There's small retention ponds and marshy areas scattered about, and across this dry fielded areas with trees and shrubberies around, there's a few major intersections, such as Pumper Road and Soda Springs, that are dirt/gravel roads that eventually lead to farms or oil or wood cutting industries, but ultimately this is just a rural area. There's a rundown rickety cemetery, but with nothing but your headlights to illuminate the darkness, you will likely miss most of this. You don't end up this far out on this road, though, at least as far as Jason's vehicle does, unless you intended to be out here. This looks nothing remotely like a paved highway road leading to a major city. In fact, it's probably the opposite of what that would look like. Also, to make this clear, Jason has made this trip to his hometown twice before in recent months. This has been confirmed. He had done it in the daytime only, but considering this road is not paved, it's not illuminated like a highway, and I can almost guarantee Jason would have gotten maybe a mile in before realizing this was the wrong way and turning around. Also, it's not like this one is like an alternate option to get to Missouri City either. This would take you into the most roundabout, out of the way, waste your gas route to ultimately get him to Missouri City. It's in the complete opposite direction. Anyways, so police believe that he missed his turn, continued on this road, where ultimately 5 miles later and approximately 10 minutes later at 11:34 p.m. he gets into a single vehicle crash. They list the area to be approximately 2300 Salt Flat Road. They believe that something occurred that led Jason to possibly overcorrect his vehicle, slide off of the gravel path and onto the small embankment, and essentially slam into 2 trees and a barbed wire fence on the driver's side of his vehicle. They threw suggestions like an animal in the road or possibly him dropping his phone or something that distracted him and caused this accident. I will say the area 100% has a hog problem that we will also go over in a bit, and I guess that lends a small amount of credit to this tiny part of their theory. They have no way to confirm this time of impact other than what I'm assuming was them taking his last footprint ping at 11:24 and calculating the time it would take him to get to that area, which according to Google Maps, because I checked, is 10 minutes. There's no witnesses to this crash. Sorry in advance if you heard my little human babbling there in the background. Our new place echoes, so when he gets anywhere near the door, like he is right now, he starts getting picked up by the microphone. But anyway, we are now going to fast forward a smidge to 12:31 a.m. It is now December 14th, 2020, and a 911 call is placed to Caldwell County Dispatch. It's a young Caldwell County volunteer firefighter who says he was returning from a call and was on Salt Flat Road when he spotted a vehicle off the road that appears to have been in an accident. He states there is no driver at the scene. The headlights are on, the driver's side front door is wide open, but no one's there. He gives his approximate location, and the dispatch says they'll send some officers out to check it out. It takes them a while to get there, but when they arrive, they meet the firefighter who was waiting at the scene. Not too long after, I believe a highway patrolman or deputy of some sort also arrives. So ultimately, we have 3 law enforcement / firefighter personnel on the scene at this accident. What they find there, though, is eerily odd, and how they handle it becomes even more odd. We have body cam footage that starts at the third person / deputy as they arrive on the scene. It picks up on the other law enforcement officer and the firefighters standing off to the side of the road with the cop digging through a backpack he found, which happens to be Jason's. You can hear the volunteer firefighter state he drove the road in the area to see if he found a driver, but found no one. He also states there's clothes in the road and that wherever the driver is, he's butt naked. Yeah. As this conversation is happening, the officer digging through the bag locates a wallet. He pulls out the ID of Jason Landry and hands it to the body cam wearing officer, who ultimately runs the info and gets the vehicle registration back that is registered to Kent and Lisa. Further inspection of the backpack changes the mood of this scene, though. In one of those pockets of the backpack, the officer finds a large orange prescription bottle. He opens it and finds several pre-rolled blunts and goes, "Hey-o, look what we have here." The mood obviously shifts immediately. Suddenly, what little concern was felt is gone and is replaced by judgy comments and laxed attitudes. The firefighter suddenly states he found a tumbler that smelled like alcohol. Then there's this conversation about how it's probably some college kid who's slinging drugs, who was blitzed, got lost and crashed, and is now out there apparently naked and lost. There's zero sense of urgency in anybody's tone. Obviously, that story is fucking ridiculous, but even for argument's sake, let's roll with it. You got a college kid who's high and lost in the woods, naked in 30-degree weather, and we aren't going to be doing everything we can to locate him and bring him to safety? Are we not law enforcement officers who work in the field of protecting and serving the community? Isn't this what they are supposed to be doing? I'm so confused. Also, when did a handful of blunts make you a fucking drug mule? Also, I'm not sure how many tumblers Jason packed, but we know there's at least one, and it had a now dead betta fish in it. That isn't going to smell like alcohol, you damn idiot. Stop projecting. But anyway, as the scene continues to unfold, we find Jason's car with his headlights, like I mentioned, on, driver's side door wide open, keys in the ignition, all the other doors are locked. He has his gaming gear still in the back seat, and then leading away from the car back towards town is a trail of clothing. A pair of underwear, a few feet later, a pair of shorts, a few feet later, a t-shirt, a few feet later, a hat, and then some socks, and then finally a pair of slides. All of the clothing we know Jason was wearing that evening is now breadcrumb trailing away from his wrecked car towards town, where it subsequently ends about 900 feet away from the road. Or wreck, not road, sorry. It's fucking weird. His bag of toiletries is off to the side of the road as well, with nothing missing. There's literally no rhyme or reason to this scene. His car has no major amount of blood, indicating even a moderate injury. There are sources that stated a very small amount of blood was found inside the vehicle. However, it was never confirmed where or whose blood it was. There is a drop found on the waistband of his underwear that were in the road and on the hip tag of the shorts. It looks like a single drop on both. Very small and not in a place that you would correlate to a car crash injury, in my opinion. It also could just be old blood. We really don't know. Next is the damage to his car. It's clear that the main point of impact was the rear driver's side taillight area. It is smashed in. It looks like it hit a pole or, a tree, which makes sense. There appears to be a secondary impact at the front driver's side tire area. No airbags went off, which I even asked claims adjuster Shadow if it was common for that to happen, and he said yes, considering this was a rear impact and that requires much more force to set off airbags than a front impact. I would assume then that the front impact was not severe enough to cause the airbags to deploy. He was driving a 2003 Nissan Altima, of which did not come with side airbags in this particular model. Hence, no evidence of that either. What I found odd, though, was the back windshield was completely shattered. Being that the only images of the car from after the vehicle was towed to the impound lot, I cannot make any inclinations about the pattern of glass fallage and landing. But obviously, if the majority was outside versus inside or vice versa, it would tell us a little bit more about how it broke. Obviously, with the majority of the impact coming to the back of the car, it would align, but the impact doesn't seem to reach higher than the trunk. What's even more noticeable is the trunk lid is ripped off and hanging by a hinge, as is the bumper completely off. Now, being that I told you the damage came to the driver's side rear, one would have to assume the hinge holding it in place would be the passenger side hinge. However, it is not. It's the driver's side trunk hinge holding it on while the passenger side is ripped the fuck off. I'm not a damage expert, so I could be way off here, but I felt like that didn't make sense whatsoever. To further complicate things, an officer on the body cam footage can be heard saying he kicked the back windshield out. I'm sure we're just talking through what we're processing here and thinking aloud, but with a driver's side door wide open, what would be the purpose of him kicking out the back windshield? In some of the photos from the impound lot of the car, there is this kind of distorted black thing that is sitting on the back seat headrest area between the seats and the windshield. At first, I thought it was the windshield frame all bent and contorted, but I can't get a good enough look at it. It's there in some pictures, it's not in others. It's more than likely a trash bag the more I look at it, but I noted it regardless. At the end of the day, though, this is the scene we have. Highway Patrol gets around to calling the Landrys at approximately 2 a.m. Lisa answers, clearly having just been woken up. The officer nonchalantly tells them they rolled up on an accident scene where this car in question was found with no driver, but Jason's wallet is here. There's clearly confusion and concern in both her and Kent's voice. The officer doesn't really provide helpful information. He doesn't really ask any questions aside from if they've spoken to Jason tonight. Kent asks what they should do and if he should head out there. The officer kind of just brushes him off and says they'll update him when they find out more information, and I'm assuming the call ends around this time. I just want to say right now, if I could have, I would have ripped that officer a new asshole. Forgive me, but the lack of empathy, concern, bedside manner, whatever you want to call it, is just irritating. I have a lot of respect for law enforcement, but this person, whoever he is, was such a horribly poor example of what to do in this type of situation. I would be so embarrassed to call him a part of my police department. There, I said it. Do better, whoever you are. Also, during this time, the firefighter mentioned an abandoned house nearby. He says he saw it, but wasn't comfortable checking it out alone and suggests it to the officers. One of them ultimately drives back to this said house, which, by the way, is incredibly creepy. The footage had me clenched the entire time. The officer heads out there alone in the middle of the night to this little shack sitting in the middle of nowhere. It has this detached baby barn in a beat up condition next to it. With his flashlight in hand, he shines it in nearby windows as he's yelling sheriff's department and getting no response. Through one of the front windows, you can see some shabby furnishings, pictures, and some other signs of life that make it not feel so abandoned. There's a black coat hanging on a hook that's in clear, plain view. However, nothing and no one appeared to respond to the officer, and ultimately he leaves this tiny portal to hell. Back home in Missouri City, Kent, being the intuitive father and ex-lawyer he is, was like, no, I'm not going to sit around and wait for a call if my son has been in an accident and no one knows where he is. I'm going to head out there and find him myself. Good for you, Kent. He jumps in his car and he begins a rough 3-hour drive out to Salt Flat Road. As he's driving there, he's in contact with his wife and asks her to keep him updated and to find out where the car is possibly going to be located on Salt Flat Road. She calls him back not long later with the address of the crash site. She tells Kent that the damn officer was at home in bed asleep and that she had woke him up to get the information. This is clearly alarming to Kent, as it should be. This is kind of the first sign that something's wrong with the search for his son. He's expecting to roll up to Salt Flat Road and see searches being performed and, volunteers or the sheriff's department or whatever being performed, seeing something, evidence being cataloged, pictures being taken, whatever the case may be. He gets to Salt Flat Road, though, just before dawn, and it's a ghost town. There is no one out there looking for his son. There's absolutely no one. He sees the tracks in the gravel where they dragged his son's vehicle out of the ditch and towed it away. But what is massively alarming is that not just a few feet away, Kent spots the clothing in the road. The breadcrumb trail of clothing is still laying in the damn road. He knows it's his son's clothes. He recognizes the church camp t-shirt. Kent goes into lawyer mode, obviously. He pulls out his camera and begins recording everything. He has video of all of the clothing left behind in a trail, the shirt, the shoes, the socks, the toiletry bag. He gives a basic rundown of the scene and where the car was. He picks up this evidence and takes it with him as he heads back into town in hopes of locating an impound lot, all the while keeping his eyes peeled for his son that no one's looking for except him. Kent comes up with the idea to utilize the Find My iPhone feature on Jason's phone to locate the phone and hopefully find Jason or at least some answers. He follows the map and it takes him to the fucking impound lot. Yeah. Kent arrives, signs off on the release of the car, being that he is the registered owner. He walks over and takes photos of the car. He enters into it and sure as day finds Jason's phone on and working. It's sandwiched between the driver's seat and the center console. Police never collected it. They never processed the car. They never did anything. Now some may be screaming, why? Good question. To which they answered, at the time they didn't feel there was a crime committed, therefore did not follow the steps required to process anything as evidence. At that time they assumed Jason was just out there high and of his own volition just avoiding them. Okay, but here's my problem. Wouldn't driving under the influence be a crime? Destruction of public property, being that he hit a fence? I mean, even if you didn't think he was a victim of any sort of anything, you still were required to collect evidence of a potential crime, right? They just didn't give two fucks. This is what is so baffling. Now, that all quickly changed when Kent arrived at the station and demanded why no one was out there looking for his son. I can imagine there was a lot of fumbling of words and ums and uhs being thrown around before they decided to get off their asses and do some work. Kent handed the evidence he collected over to them, filed a missing persons report, and the ball finally got rolling on locating Jason nearly 12 hours later. Search teams, including Texas EquiSearch, arrived, sent tracking dogs, drones, people on ATVs, to navigate the rough terrain, volunteers, people on horseback, all are out searching Salt Flat Road for Jason. I've found multiple accounts of stuff pertaining to this search, including Jason's scent being tracked from his car along the road for about a quarter of a mile back towards Lilling before disappearing. Initially, I was like, he must have got in a car. That makes sense. Someone picked him up. That has to be it. But as I researched further, I found that this was about the same path of his clothes laying in the street. The same direction and relative length before ending, and I think this scent tracking was simply left behind by his clothes. Now, I can't confirm that, but I think that this most likely is the case. I read another source that stated that Jason's scent may have been tracked to that abandoned house the officer checked out that night prior, but I wasn't able to confirm that information anywhere else, and nothing has been stated to be found relating to Jason and that location. What I was able to find and confirm, though, was that several scent dogs from several handlers, and possibly on several different occasions, or at least not all at once, tracked Jason's scent to a nearby retention pond. Kent described it to be close to the accident scene with a grassy knoll, and just past it is the pond. Images show this to be quite a decent-sized pond. It happens to be located on privately owned land, so they contact the owner, who allows them to begin the process of searching and draining the pond to uncover evidence. The draining process ends up taking several days, more than expected. But sonar imaging and professional divers grid search this pond in an effort to locate whatever it is the dogs picked up on. But nothing is found. Eventually, the pond is drained out to about ankle-deep water, where they confirm there's nothing of physical evidentiary value here. Odd enough, though, that several scent dogs led here. The utilization of drones to map out areas and points of interest is used, and searches are sent out there to look. They're wearing tracking devices so that investigators can physically cross off specific areas that were searched and clear them. Local game cameras in the area were also checked for footage from the night Jason went missing in hopes of locating him. Oil tanks in the surrounding areas are checked over periods of time, and nothing is ever found in them. Eventually, searches are called off after several weeks for a couple of reasons. A, the area is just so vast and it is draining their manpower and resources with nothing coming up, which leads to point B, being that some were beginning to wonder if they were even looking in the right area, which is a very valid thought in my opinion. With no evidence surfacing and no communications from Jason, police started to form a more weird theory of what happened. They began to think that after the accident that night, Jason left his vehicle willingly. Again, they believe one of two reasons. Him to be this massive drug enthusiast in their minds, it seems, combined with the possibility of a concussion from the crash, led him to undress himself out of confusion, disorientation, whatever, and that he wandered around in the wooded vastness and succumbed to the elements, and the only reason that they hadn't found him thus far was because, and this is the worst part of it all, guys, he was eaten by wild hogs in the area. They also consider that due to the internet searches on Jason's electronics a week before his disappearance, they cannot rule out this being an intentional disappearance. There's just so much wrong with this, and the fact that this is supposed to be coming from law enforcement professionals is bewildering. I've already gone over the absurdity of this being intentional. He didn't pack for a wilderness trip. He packed gaming equipment. His pet fish and a pair of shorts and slides were the only clothing he really had. He used a Waze app to map out a trip to an entirely different location, a familiar location, his hometown. Not the wilderness, and as far as we know, he was following that trip faithfully until he reached Lilling and checked Snapchat for some odd reason. Also, if this was a drug-fueled excursion that went wrong, where are the drugs? We have a handful of weed left in a backpack at an abandoned car wreck. There's no LSD, shrooms, acid, Molly. I don't know if any of that is the same shit or not, but I know they are correlated with psychedelic and psychoactive experiences. Nothing indicates he had any of that. Otherwise, wouldn't dogs have picked that up on the scene? And mind you, he's naked wherever he is, so it's not like he's carrying it in his pockets. Jason was missing for 12-ish hours before searches began looking for him. While there is a huge wild hog problem in this part of town, don't get me wrong, so much so that they have bounties on those who can catch them and turn in proof of ridding them in the area, I refuse to believe that he not only succumbed to the elements in that short amount of time, but that he was devoured whole by pigs, and no dogs could track even the faintest of scents or blood or bone or scrap within that short amount of time. It's absurd. This theory makes no sense. There's more holes in this than a slice of Swiss cheese. Thankfully, I'm not the only one who sees it this way. Months after Jason's disappearance, and with no new information coming in, a fellow classmate of Jason's, who also happened to be the ex-girlfriend of one of his close friends, decided to ask her father, ex-FBI turned PI, Abel Pena, to have a look at the case. He did, and he wanted to help. He reached out to the Landry family and has been working on the case since. He went to Lilling, he conducted searches, interviews, scouting, etc., etc. He comes to the conclusion that he doesn't agree with this wild drug-fueled element succumbing hog-eating theory the professionals are working. He found that the intersection where Jason's final digital footprint was documented is an area notorious for drug and other criminal activity within Lilling. He states that after speaking to several residents, he's got the feeling that people know more but are fearful of repercussions if they talk. He says a few people stated that they know what happened to Jason, that he ran into trouble here in Lilling, and that ultimately foul play was involved, and that Jason was not the one who drove his vehicle out onto Salt Flat Road that fateful night. Now, there hasn't been any evidence to support that so far, but there also hasn't been any evidence to not support that either. Pena also states he received an anonymous letter to his home address that made similar claims and listed persons of interest. He has turned this information and theory over to authorities working the case, however, they aren't taking it seriously. And he's correct. The lead investigator at the time has stated that he doesn't buy that theory and feels that it's just people chasing their 15 minutes of fame and attention for this case. He says he knows this town well, and that more than likely that's what's happening with these tips that are coming in. Overall, he doesn't believe foul play is involved. He believes this is so much so that the evidence collected from Jason's car, including DNA swabs that have been collected, have not been submitted for testing due to the fact that they have no reason to believe a crime was committed, therefore no obligation to essentially waste resources to have them processed. Ultimately, Pena believes that something happened at that intersection of Austin and Magnolia that evening. He says that he doesn't believe that cell tower data can eliminate this possibility. While investigators stated they scouted that intersection, which, by the way, houses a park, a church, a Jiffy Lube type of business, and a gas station, for surveillance footage, nothing of evidentiary value was obtained. I can't deny that this theory makes far more sense than the hog one that investigators are running. As the case stands right now, I haven't been able to locate any new information since early last year. Last I read, there was a petition circulating that has since shut down to collect enough signatures, to get a geofence type warrant approved for the night in question. What this is essentially a warrant that will pull the records that exist of all the active cell phones in the area for the period of time in question, so as to build a potential suspect list. The problem with this type of warrant, though, is that it causes big waves in the realm of the Fourth Amendment protections. There are many privacy laws set in place to protect information like this, and obtaining a warrant that reveals that information requires a lot of jumping through hoops. Being that law enforcement agency for Lilling and Caldwell County don't believe that there is a crime here, I'm sure that is hindering the process of that warrant. The current status of that warrant is unknown at this time. In other news, though, the latest update to the case is that the DA's office will now be taking over this case from the agency that originally worked it. They have made generic statements promising to fine-tooth comb this investigation and this case. This was in January of 2022, I believe, and I haven't heard or seen any substantial updates since then. The Landry family have been the sole force in keeping their son's case relevant. Kent has been interviewed countless times, given countless statements, each more heartbreaking than the next. The Facebook page dedicated to Jason's case is active and rings with personal warmth about Jason and how much he is loved and missed. His family is active in Luling, continuing their efforts and awareness. They have fought through a recent possible update in finding Jason when a John Doe was admitted to a New York hospital who bore a striking resemblance to Jason. However, records confirmed it was not him. They continue to push forward and seek answers, and my thoughts are with them. Please feel free to head over to their Facebook page and spread awareness. I'll link the description and other sources in the episode's description box below. What I would like to do now, though, is move on to potential theories I have for the case. The biggest issue so far is convincing investigators there is enough here to warrant foul play and begin an actual criminal investigation. My personal opinion is that there is enough logic here to rule anything but foul play out, and here's why. Despite Jason's questionable search history and alleged behavior in the days and week leading up to his disappearance, there is nothing to indicate that Jason left that night from his home with the intention of not arriving in Missouri City. He packed items like gaming equipment and his pet fish as indications that he had specific intentions when leaving. He utilized a navigation app to make sure he arrived at this destination. Even if his friends' account of him being blitzed to the point of possibly not remembering, hence recording their FaceTime calls that evening, are true, there's nothing in Jason's known behaviors of that night that speak to that for me. He packed overnight items, valuable items to take to a friend's house. There was structure to his actions. He planned his course of action to get to Missouri City, and up until Luling, Texas, he followed that plan to a T. We have no way of ruling out the possibility that he wasn't alone for any part of that trip. I'm personally struggling with the friend who screen recorded that call with Jason. That's just not going down well with me at all. The more I chew on it, the more I do not want to swallow it and digest it, and it just keeps coming back up. I know what I see, and it's not aligning with what's been said, but that's just me. Jason's digital footprint timestamps all align with someone who is driving at a normal speed. He meets all the areas of interest at the expected time the navigational app predicts. There's no rushing or speeding indicated, in my opinion. He gets to the intersection of East Austin and Magnolia, and shit just begins to go hard left here. We lose Jason's digital footprint completely, which is not normal behavior for a 21-year-old teenager in 2020, let alone Jason, who's been faithfully following his Waze app. We minimize it for Snapchat, but why? My most logical assumption is because we receive a snap. If this is true, it would insinuate that the contents of that snap changed the course of this case. I can't give a definitive answer as to what, considering police have fervently denied any connection to Jason and the intent of meeting anyone in Luling that night. They have stood by that more clearly than even the wild hog statements. I'm not entirely sure how they are able to deny any of this unless they can clarify what Jason was doing on Snapchat at this intersection. I don't think that they can be confident in that statement or rule out that possibility. Another functional theory here would be that Jason stopped at this intersection for a reason and encountered a third party he may or may not have known. Several things that come to mind could be to get gas. I'm curious how full his gas tank was at the time of discovery. Despite his friend Jack claiming Jason had not been eating or sleeping much in the days leading up to this night, it's possible Jason pulled over for some snacks, to use the restroom, or to even nap if sleep suddenly overcame him. I don't think there's sufficient evidence to rule this out. Police said they checked surveillance footage. They never stated they confirmed Jason passing this intersection and continuing on to Salt Flat Road. They never confirmed even finding surveillance footage, period. So I don't think this can be ruled out. The only other option I could think of when I put myself into Jason's position was the possibility of him pulling over for a smoke shop of sorts. This had me wondering if there were any in the area at that time. I googled the intersection and found the only shop in Luling, Texas happened to be at this particular intersection. A quick check of their website stated that they were founded in 2020, despite me not being able to find a social media presence until 2021. A browse through their merch shows many smoking-related items I'm sure could catch Jason's attention, but they also carried Marvel merchandise, including his beloved Spider-Man. They also had funky socks. The snag I run into here is that their current business hours put them closing at 10 p.m., a whole hour and some change before Jason would have even been anywhere near the area. However, it's possible that they had different hours back then, or that Jason was unaware they were even closed when he rolled up to the establishment. He maybe saw the sign from the corner and decided to drive over. He pulled up and realized they were closed, and that's when he encountered some sort of third party. Mind you, the PI stated this area was notorious for drug-related crimes. If there were shady characters in the area and they spotted Jason rolling up potentially alone, we can't rule that possibility out either. What supports this theory is the digital footprint ending here. There's no activity despite it staying on until the next day when Kent finds it sandwiched in the car seat butt crack. As it currently stands, this is my functioning theory. He derailed from his route to make a pit stop of some sort and was confronted by a third party, known or unknown. I can't rule out either. Now, we're operating on roughly a 67-minute window of time from Jason's last footprint ping to the time the call came in about his abandoned vehicle. That's not a lot of time to make a person disappear a mere 5 miles away. But what I do know is this. Jason had driven to Missouri City before. Dark or light, by the time that street turned into Salt Flat Road, he would have known he was headed in the wrong direction. In one of Kent's earlier interviews, he said maybe it's possible that a malfunction of the Waze app led him out there. But we can confirm this is not possible because the phone was not being used. We would know if he was following an invalid route. Jason was more than likely not using his phone once he got to Magnolia and Austin because he was no longer able to. If you get into an accident and are able to walk away from it, the first thing you do is call for help. That was never done. Next, you attempt to walk back and get help, yet he doesn't take his keys or phone or wallet with him. His car was found with all the doors locked except the driver's side door, which was wide open. My point is, I'm supposed to believe that instead of calling for help or locking up and walking back, he chooses to strip down naked in 30-something degree weather and walk to town with all his valuables, gaming gear, his pet fish, and his wallet and phone still left in an unsecured vehicle. That's not what happened, and I'm sure everyone except the hog wild captain whatever would agree. Being that all his doors except the driver door were locked had me wondering if that was intentional or not. His car doesn't appear to have the type of doors that automatically lock when you reach 15 miles per hour. Instead, those doors are intentionally locked by either the key in the door turning to lock all of them like the older cars did, or it came with a fob that can lock or unlock it, or open the trunk, or, panic button. They didn't have remote start on this type of vehicle. So his locked doors would lead me to believe that no one else entered the vehicle at any time after Jason locked them. If he had an accomplice with him, I failed to see them remembering to lock their door as they fled the scene, unless they climbed out of the driver's side, but that wouldn't make a ton of sense. Whoever was in the car last, Jason or someone else operating it, I believe they were alone. There's no sign of a struggle within the car. All of his valuables, again, are still in the back seat. His wallet still on the scene. There's no mention of cash on hand, if any, and it does make me wonder if Jason was a cash-carrying type of guy or if he only used plastic to pay for everything. For the most part, it is easy to rule theft off the list here because Jason was known to carry, if he was known to carry a lot of cash and that wasn't at the scene, then we could factor it in. But all of his valuables were still there. That really only leaves us with the question of if this was foul play, and I am much more inclined to believe that it is rather than not. What's the motive? In order to answer that, we have to ask the question of who would want foul play inflicted upon Jason. All reports state he had no enemies, no fights with friends or acquaintances are mentioned, and he doesn't seem to be the fighting type. He seems much more laid back and relaxed and happy. But the weed factor needs to be pondered here. Weed is not cheap. And judging by the usage described, he had to have been spending X amount of cash regularly for weed. Again, no judgment here. His Facebook profile says he was employed at Jimmy John's and the church camp referenced earlier. Exact dates and status of that employment are unknown at this time, though. While I don't think weed is the type of drug to throw one into the depths of deadly despair like meth or heroin, where you are to the point of owing everyone, pawning TVs and whatnot, I do have to consider if maybe he owes someone money and maybe his connect or, a friend, and they got mad that they hadn't been paid back in a timely manner. Is it a stretch? Yeah, probably, but in this case, I cannot rule any possibility if it hasn't been confirmed by factual evidence, and unfortunately there's very little public factual evidence in this case. Just a lot of what ifs. So therefore logic must carry us the rest of the way. I have no doubt in my mind that at some point in the night, from the time Jason departed his residence at 10:55 and the time his car was discovered at 12:30, he encountered at least one other person. Whoever this person is had no intention of robbing him for monetary items or possessions. How he came in contact with this person is also unclear. Was it a planned meetup that just, has gone undetected up until this point? It's possible. Could it have been a chance encounter? It's also equally possible. Or could it have been somebody who was in the car with him the whole time? It's also possible. Something I haven't mentioned yet was that a witness came forward at some point and stated they were on Salt Flat Road in the area at about roughly 11:30 p.m. and saw no one and no car crash as they were passing by. The witness stated that they worked at one of the nearby oil plants. I also did a dig into the type of crime that Luling and Caldwell County deal with, particularly for the year 2020 and before. Larceny was a big one for them. There were 0 murders reported, which seemed odd because I had found a news article about the murder of 2 teens by some weirdo who thought he was being chased by aliens on ATVs, which ended up just being the 2 teens out scouting for burn patches during burn season out there. So I'm not sure how reliable that source was, but overall, a search of violent crime in Luling doesn't seem to be a big thing. There's a siren going on, sorry. Anyway, larceny, for those who do not know, is simply non-violent and sometimes non-confrontational theft of personal property. I couldn't find any news reports of assaults or shootings or robberies that were violent, or even the drug problems the town was allegedly having at this time. Seems like a genuine safe place to live, and I'm sure it is, but we all know bad things come out to play late at night, even in the most safest of places sometimes. Plus, where his car was found would be a prime location for crime. There's nothing and no one out there, and it's pitch black. But that brings up an interesting question that was posed earlier. How can we be sure Jason was actually out there? Sure, his car was, but nothing about the manner in which his car was found definitively proves he was the one who put it there. A 21-year-old who is very active on his phone just decides to stop all usage once he's out here. He chooses to undress himself and leave his clothes in the middle of the road and simply vanish. I looked up paradoxal undressing. It has no correlation to concussions. It's related directly to the end stages of hypothermia, which, don't get me wrong, it was cold out there, but it wasn't cold enough for him to have hypothermia so quickly. Several searches over several years now have not been able to come up with so much as a scrap of evidence that Jason was there. The PI and other third-party law enforcement officers that have looked over this case, including FBI personnel, agree that the scene of the accident reeks of staged. I lean towards the same inkling simply based on the facts that I listed. Jason wasn't an idiot. He was smart, he was driven, he had plans, and he had family and friends that he loved and that loved him. Nothing about who he is or how he handled himself spoke to the type of actions that were indicated by the evidence at the scene. A minor weed habit and a couple of oddball internet searches does not equate to a person with a death wish or an irresponsible college kid getting too high and dying in the woods to a bunch of man-eating hogs. In case you're curious, I also looked up how common hog attacks or death by wild hogs are. There are 4 on record throughout the nation within the last century and a half, with the most recent being a few years ago. Some suspect there's an underreporting issue, maybe, but I think more people would be reported missing or injured if hog attacks or eatings were actually a real threat here. At the end of the day, I think this case needs to start back at the very beginning, recast a very wide net, reevaluate his inner circle, and web out from there, friends of friends, acquaintances, find a link to Luling. I cannot completely shake the idea that this has hints of a setup, and I think there's a very buried potential tie to Luling in this case. His car ended up out there where it was because someone knew it would be the perfect place to put it and no one else would witness it. That hints at a local or someone who has enough knowledge of the area. Without a body, we lose a lot of potential clues. Manner and cause of death lent a lot to an investigation. Someone shot execution style versus someone who was beaten and stabbed over 50 times tell 2 very different motives and stories. With a window of time from 11:30 to 12:30, that doesn't leave much to get far from the scene if you were on foot. No footprints from the scene and scents that lead seemingly nowhere make you wonder if he ever was in fact out there or if his belongings just are. I don't think he was. It is my honest opinion that something terrible happened out there on Salt Flat Road. You take the facts you have on a case and you branch out from there. When the facts don't make sense, it usually means there's a fault in them. The facts we have in this case do not line up. There's no logical conclusion to how Jason ended up out there without ever touching his phone once and leaving the scene naked unless there was some sort of third-party intervention. That is clear as day. And as far as I'm concerned, the fact that there has been no sign of Jason since December 13th, 2020, that would indicate that whoever that third party is has something to hide. If that's not indicative of foul play, or at the very least knowledge of it, I don't know what is. This case ultimately was not given the treatment it needed when Jason's car was discovered that evening, and I have gone over every possible scenario I can come up with. I researched hogs in the area and what causes them to attack, how fast they can eat a fully grown man. I researched the route from Luling to the crash site inch by inch on outdated Google Maps just to see the route and the residential houses and the businesses he could have passed or could have walked to. I researched town history with crime and found nothing to insinuate this is a common occurrence here. I researched drug paraphernalia found in his backpack to see if it was uncommon and could be traced to the local smoke shop as a potential vendor for it. I researched smoke shops in the area in general to see if they could potentially have been a reason for Jason to detour off his route to Missouri City. I even looked into the firefighter who found his car that evening because I honestly felt he was just a little too conveniently located that evening with our small window of time. How could you have not seen something, right? I was able to confirm his identity and the fact that he was in fact a volunteer firefighter. I found his socials and scoured them to see if there were any changes in behavior since Jason's disappearance. I looked up address history since he references living on Soda Springs and cross-checked that with all known owners and renters I could find who lived on Soda Springs as a way to attempt to validate his info. Ultimately, I couldn't find anything suspicious enough to point at him, but I honestly think this is kind of the mentality this case needs. Trust no one who has touched this. Trust no one who has given information. Something stinks in this case, and I can't pinpoint it, but I want answers for it, and I can't even begin to imagine how bad Jason's family wants answers. I hope the DA pushes this case hard and re-examines all evidence and testimonies. I hope they run all the DNA evidence collected from the car after impound. Something needs to be done. People don't just fall off the planet. People don't go missing for no reason. He didn't run away. He didn't go on some spiritual psychedelic journey. He's missing. And he's missing under suspicious circumstances. And it's time cases like this are taken more seriously. I will never understand the laxed mentality behind missing persons cases, especially adult ones. Just because they can legally leave on their own accord doesn't mean that they did. Wouldn't you rather investigate it and find out that it is in fact the case than brush it off only to find out months later the person was kidnapped or murdered or held against their will and you had an opportunity to help but you chose not to? Why is our system so delayed reactive instead of reactive, or even better, proactive when it comes to this stuff? In conclusion, guys, if you have seen Jason Landry or know any information about his disappearance or what happened in the area on the night of December 13th, 2020 on Salt Flat Road or in Luling, Texas, please reach out to authorities. You can always remain anonymous. With that, folks, that's all I have for now. I will be back with more cases to discuss, hopefully some updates and some good news on many of them, including this one. But until next time, stay safe.